Good morning. We're going to be in the Hudson. I think everybody in here knows where those words came from. But to recap, Chesley Sully Sullenberger, captain of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, said those words. On January 15th, 2009, his Airbus A320 with 155 passengers and crew aboard had just departed New York's LaGuardia Airport and had just struck birds, rendering both engines inoperable. During the 3.5-minute event, Captain Sullenberger would say just 65 words to air traffic control. Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Jeff Skiles would say just 245 words to each other throughout the event. As everyone here knows, the outcome was a successful landing on the Hudson River. However, just 6 months later, on June 1st, 2009, Air France Flight 447, an Airbus A330 with 236 passengers and crew aboard, departed Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, for the 10.5-hour overnight flight north across the Atlantic to Paris, France. About 3 hours into the flight, the captain departed the cockpit as part of a normal mandated crew rest rotation due to the long duration of the flight. The relief pilot came forward to assist the first officer with flying duties. A few minutes after the captain departed the cockpit, the aircraft transited some stormy weather. The pitot tube, the sensor outside the aircraft which measures airspeed, froze over. The airspeed indication in the cockpit went to 0. The autopilot disconnected, the auto throttles disconnected, leaving the two aviators to fly the airplane manually. This in itself is not an emergency situation. For reasons that still really aren't clear, the relief pilot began to over-control the aircraft. He over-controlled it to the point where the aircraft began an uncontrolled descent in the darkness toward the ocean. For the next 3.5 minutes, both aviators tried their best to troubleshoot the problem, manage the emergency, and find a solution. They hailed the captain to come back to the cockpit from his rest period. All three men tried their best to troubleshoot the problem. Until about 7,500 feet above the ocean, the relief pilot told his fellow crew members, "I've been pulling back on the stick for a while now." Meaning he had taken action which had not solved the problem and had actually contributed to the problem because he had stalled the aircraft, preventing it from maintaining a normal flight regime to sustain normal flight operations. This was an absolutely critical piece of information that the crew had to have in order to troubleshoot the problem. And unfortunately, the aircraft crashed and all aboard were lost. The crews and the aircraft of both situations, highly professional, modern airplanes, but both faced wildly different outcomes. In my almost 2 decades of flying jet aircraft in the United States Marine Corps, before every single flight, we always briefed a communications plan. We briefed administrative communications, meaning normal communications that would happen through routine flight operations. Who was going to talk to air traffic control? Who was going to run checklists? Who was going to talk to any other agency that we needed to interact with in order to execute our flight? We briefed emergency communications. What if we had a problem? Who's going to talk to air traffic control? Who's going to run the emergency checklist? Who's going to run talking to any other agency we might need to interact with? We also briefed what happens if we just lost communication. We can't talk to each other in the airplane. We can't talk to other airplanes. We can't talk to air traffic control. We even briefed this contingency if we were flying in a formation of airplanes. Where I work now at Harris County in Houston, Texas, there were numerous lessons learned after Hurricane Harvey, to include those that included communication. As examples, we relied heavily on cell phones for communicating with each other. Had the cell phone network been compromised, that would have been challenging. There were also problems with handheld radios, too many people on the same frequency trying to talk to each other. Numerous lessons learned from communication. So how do we use basic communication to prevent a manageable incident from going to catastrophic? First, I recommend a personal communications audit. How do you send information and how do you receive information? Do you use effective means? Who are your trusted individuals around you or organizations around you that can give you feedback on how effective your communications are? As a practical example, a lot of us, me included, rely on email at work for a lot of communication. Is that effective? Maybe, maybe not. Next, Do you include a debrief on communications as part of tabletop exercises, as part of drills, as part of real-world situations? After those are done, do you talk about communications? What went well, what didn't go well? Finally, do you have a communications plan? Is it part of your emergency management plan? Is it part of your disaster response plan? You can never assume that everybody's on the same page with communication. Never assume that everybody's on the same page with communication. This is especially important if your emergency management effort or your disaster recovery effort involves adjunct parties, third parties that are helping you with your response to the incident. As we see from the case of Air France Flight 447, it was essentially one sentence that made a difference in that incident. One sentence that made a difference in that incident. Have a plan, know your plan, train to your plan, debrief your plan, improve your plan for communications. Prevent the situation from going from something manageable to something catastrophic just through basic communication. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I appreciate it.